Okay, now we're going. Thank you, thank you.
Kind of paranoia get to the end of it.
And you're like, no, okay.
Is it taping now? Are
Is
we
it,
rolling?
does that mean it's taking?
It is, yeah.
It's counting up.
It's going.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
good.
All right, let's all be professional. You're a professional group of educators that I'm presenting this to, right? All right.
Yes.
All right. The first thing I had to do was come up with a problem. And guess what? We don't have a lot of problems at our particular school. We're very fortunate here. We came up with a few. I think you guys helped me a little bit in the meeting get some ideas. But it turns out that gender in science and math subjects is still a huge problem. It's been something that's been known since the 70s, but it's actually getting worse, is what I found out. So my project was on that, and specifically was on pedagogical techniques to address gender disparity, because that's something we can do something about in our world, in our classrooms, particularly, of course, in science and math classrooms. But my background is in arts integration and education, so I was curious to see whether that, as a teaching technique, could be shown to address gender disparity in STEM subjects. So that's what the research is about. So just background, what is STEM? If you don't know, it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Typically, science and mathematics are taught. Engineering is not generally specifically taught, although it's starting to be in makers programs, and technology sometimes, not much here. So arts integration is not adding a separate art class to the curriculum. It's using any of what's called the 4 arts domains to create a lesson with a learning objective in a separate subject. So in any subject, using music, visual art, dance, or drama to teach a different objective, like in history, literature, science, math, or any academic subject. Any questions about that? It's different. Some people get confused with it being about just adding an additional arts class. And there's been a lot of studies on integration specifically, and most of them show quantitatively that motivation, learning, and just self-reporting on that increases exponentially for students when you use art within an academic subject. And they've done really big studies across the country, and they found that there's actually test score increases of 12%. So this was on a sample size of quite a large sample size. I think it was about 50,000 students. So they looked at districts that trained teachers to integrate arts versus not, and found that it had a big effect. So it is a known technique. Arts, in short, have the greatest impact of any subject on standardized test scores, which is a pretty well-vetted statement. That's actually my dad. So just examples so we can visualize it. Typically things like using a dance to teach anatomy, doing a play about a period in history, composing a song to learn a foreign language, or creating a visual work of art about an ecosystem. Those are examples of it. I think when we used to give workshops back in the early 90s about arts integration, we would take something like the westward expansion, and we would bring in a dancer, a director, a visual artist, and a musician, and we'd have them each do that lesson that way with the teachers, so they learned how to do it. And that just brings me to the history of my involvement with this. I've been a research associate for the Imagination Group since I was 15, and the first thing we did was we got hired by the Galef Institute to develop this curriculum called Ways of Knowing, and that's what I was talking about with the workshops that we did. And that progressed into work with the Inner City Arts program in LA, and now it's through an organization called the Center for Research on Creativity, and it's at UCLA in London, and it's funded by grants from Disney, actually, and a whole bunch of other people who are interested in looking at whether we can use arts education and arts combined with STEM to increase general creativity for kids. And there's a book about it that came out. This is also just background and history. a long time ago, we took a database of 20,000 students from LA Unified Schools, and we correlated their dropout rates and all these other things to whether they were involved in the arts. And this kind of is what got all the funding and got really famous, was this study. This graph is doing well by doing art, so it's kind of a traditional idea of how students can do well, like attending four-year colleges and things like that. The doing good part, I don't have the graphs, but the graphs of doing good by doing art were really interesting. Those correlated community involvement, public service, and things like that to arts, and it was also a pretty high correlation. So what is STEAM? STEAM is the next step for STEM for a lot of people. If we want graduates of our educational system to become innovators on the world stage, we must teach art alongside STEM subjects. That is by a really famous engineer. Einstein actually saw himself as an artist, for example. A lot of people who've won Nobel Prizes in chemistry attribute it to their early music education and things like that. Some advantages of a STEAM program. So STEAM is just adding an A to STEM. So it's science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. There's research showing they teach a lot of 21st century skills. They combine convergent and divergent thinking, so they make a whole lot of new brain connections between being creative and doing science and engineering, which is what produces innovation. And also just, as a technique to use in school, they combine habits of mind in the studio with laboratory habits of mind, which if you've ever taught or seen an art studio in a school and a laboratory in a school, they're very similar ways of working. So, so I was looking at gender disparity and thinking, why would you use a STEAM program to address that? And one of the things that's happening right now is there's the first online community for female engineers going on, and it's just exploding, and it's in e-textiles. So there's actually some things happening out there. And also in the research, when you look at research that's about what's happening in classrooms, a lot of times they're looking at how girls don't have a chance to form a science identity. And often in classrooms, they're doing it through artifact creation. So when they have an opportunity to create something hands-on and be creative, they're starting to identify with the subject more. And basically, there's nothing else out there for classroom-based interventions. There's a lot of research about role models, and sometimes that's successful. There's research about separating genders, but as far as what's actually happening in the classroom to address it, there's very little, and people really aren't trained to address it either in the classroom. So is gender disparity in STEM subjects still an issue? Yes, unfortunately it is. It's been known since the 70s. This I'm actually going to go to the condensed timeline. When students are babies and up through kindergarten, there's been a ton of research on how their brains work, and there's absolutely no difference in ability between men and women, between girls and boys. And in pre-K, there's no difference at all in interest, motivation, ability in math and science. They're all equally excited to do math and science. In 5th grade, in the US, test scores have actually reached parity. There's no difference anymore between math and science for girls and boys. So that's progress over the last 10 years. By the time we get to 8th grade, girls are scoring 12% lower across math and science. California actually just started science for 5th through 8th as a test, standardized test. But moreover, girls are about half as likely as boys to express wanting to be an engineer, mathematician, or a scientist. And then in high school, girls are lagging significantly in AP scores, and only about 13% across the country say they're interested in math and science. And then once we get to college, only 18% of engineering degrees in the US are awarded to women, and it's unfortunately about, out of the top 5 well-paid careers, it's like 3 of them are engineering, so it's kind of a bummer. Any questions? Hi, Dee. Would you like to join us? know why. This is such a depressing thing. So there's lots of different speculations about it. One culprit could be the media. A study of family films, the ratio of male to female role models who are in computer science and engineering is about 14.25 to 1. So lots more men are held up as images of scientists and engineers. In primetime TV, 5.4 to 1, so still not very good. Another recent, very recent study, unfortunately, sort of blamed the academic establishment. Some people at Yale sent out resumes for men and women that had equal qualifications as a lab assistant to 127 different professors. And those people were asked to rate them in terms of what job, who they would offer the job to and what salary they would offer. And it was consistently across the board that they would offer it to the men first, and the men had a higher salary offered to them too when they were compared. And those were both male and female academic scientists, none of whom would have said that they were gender biased. So it's something pretty deep in the culture still. Culprit 3, brain science. There have been various different studies to come out, some of which were really aimed at saying, well, women's brains just don't work this way, which has obviously been disproven. But we do have different brains. Men and women have different brains at maturity. There's no difference in the connections that you need to excel at math and science or the brain structures that you need, but there are differences in what is perceived as pleasurable, and those are real. The specifics are that women have a higher blood flow to the brain and bigger structures in the areas that perceive emotional resonance and storytelling as pleasurable, and those are things that are not traditionally part of math and science classrooms, but they could be. And then there's the whole idea, this study's based on gender, but there's a lot going on in the world of gender right now. Gay male brains tend to be more like female brains, and lesbian brains tend to be more like male brains. And then there's no research whatsoever on people who are transgendered and nonconforming. So there's a big future to look at there. There is some research on how those people feel when they try to go into a science field, which, as you can imagine, is fairly unheard of and very difficult. So that's the cognition thing. So in the study, the two research questions were, the first one was, can arts integration address gender disparity in STEM subjects? And then the secondary question was, can arts integration increase motivation and engagement in STEM subjects for all students? So there were interventions done with the 5th grade, 6th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, and 10th grade. The 5th graders did a visual art project with electric circuits, as did the 8th graders. The 6th graders did a mathematical dance about fractions. And the 9th graders did an energy transfer project that was also integrated with visual art. And the 10th graders did geometry with a visual art project. And then what this study added that has never been done was to also ask a self-expression question in the lesson. So they were presented with a lesson in a really traditional way about the topic. It was explained on the board. They did a handout or something traditional science class style. And then they had to create a work of art using that knowledge. And in addition, the work of art had a specific question attached to it. So the 5th graders were asked to create something that represented their family heritage. The 6th graders were asked, what does it feel like to come back to school in the fall? Which was pretty entertaining. They started with the funeral dirge, but they progressed to something better when they really thought about it. The 8th grade was asked to represent a moment in your life when you learned something or realized something important. This wasn't entirely successful because 8th graders don't really